when the Sage job was announced, or rather shown in the Endwalker expansion trailer, I think that I wasn't alone in being completely blown away at wondering, what exactly am I looking at right now? This is really different. This is really unexpected. We had 4 guns blowing everywhere, floating in the sky, going pew, 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 pew. And it was just absolutely wild. It was a very distinct style of combat that I have yet to see in any MMORPG I've played. I'm like stretching to the back of my imagination. Have I seen anything like that? So I personally was wondering what exactly might have inspired the Sage, and that is going to be exactly what this video actually is going to try and do. And I actually have a theory that I think really does hold some merit, so yeah, let the fangirling commence. So let's quickly recap of what we know exactly right now. So the weapons have been named the Nouliths and are a unique weapon for Final Fantasy XIV. We could see from the footage from the expansion trailer that they acted very similarly to guns, hovering and floating around, being coordinated around a target. We can also see in the game footage that they are capable of dispensing incredibly large beams that are just massive and able to bathe like the entire field in their like weapon fire. It's crazy. Other notes worth mentioning in this video is that the Sage is a barrier type healer, and we can see the Sage deploy barrier on the tank to nullify incoming damage. And one other point worth mentioning is that the Sage can also augment their abilities to act in unique ways, as we saw from the PowerPoint slide. Now with what we know, I was wondering about what could have inspired this Sage, because it's really unique. But just let me chip in here that if you want to help support me and my content, I would super incredibly appreciate if you slapped a stack of Nouliths on that like button. Or should I say a stack of fin funnels, eh? Eh? Don't worry, we'll get there in this video. And if you can't daddy that subscribe button. So having played many MMORPGs in the past and various other games, my mind instantly raced to things like, oh my gosh, this was the Spellslinger Chua from WildStar with its dual pistols. Or what about the Cabal Online Force Archer that could modify its weapons from being a bow to being a dual gunslinging monster of destruction and healing and support? Nope, in reality, neither of these really made much sense. Or what about Overwatch, where I do play supports like Anna who shoots targets to heal them. Yes, if you haven't played Overwatch, yes, I mean she literally shoots them, which damages enemies and heals allies, yes, really. Or what about Baptiste, with his gun able to shoot targets similar to the Endwalker trailer, but is also able to volley healing into allies? Well, that really didn't fit either, and as amusing as it was in my mind to imagine an Anna or a Baptiste with 4 floating guns around their heads going pew 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 pew, not so much a thing. Now, taking a bit of time to think and just like wonder like what could this be, it actually brought me back to the letter published by YoshiP on December 11th of last year, just a short few months ago. And while I do not feel it's appropriate for me to comment on or to even dare to summarize this letter, it however is incredibly relevant to this discussion in my opinion. Again, I do want to add the caveat before I go on that I think, I'm not saying that it must be the thing, but in my mind at least, this is like, oh, this is making a lot of sense here. And so this letter makes a reference to their mutual love towards Gundam, a TV show that I too have very much been a fan of for many years growing up, and it involves massive machines being piloted for incredibly impressive sci-fi combat. It has been a very long-running series and has, oh my god, would saying millions of fans around the world be an understatement? Probably. But when we look at the current content in Final Fantasy XIV, it is very easy, actually, to see Gundam references through things like the Ruby weapon, the Emerald weapon, and we even get to pilot one as the Ironworks G Warrior. But in particular, in this letter, there was a reference to the new Gundam Version Ka. I have probably said that wrong, and I am sincerely sorry. But this is a model kit that he was giving to his dear friend. And I'm just going to read one of the paragraphs here, just because I think that it will add some more context. Is YoshiP stated, once time passes, I'm sure that there will be a day when I can see him again. When that happens, I'm sure he'll find me with a sprout on my head, not knowing my right from my left, and reach his hand out to me with allies he found on the other side, saying, oh, you must be a newcomer. It's okay. It's lots of fun over on this side too. Let's go adventuring together. And in that hand will be the new Gundam. I sincerely believe that. Well, to say the least, even months ago when I first read this, I thought this was one of the most beautiful... beautiful things that one could give to a friend. But taking it a step further and reeling it back into Sage territory rather than trying to like just after seeing the Sage, I really do think that this could be a job very much inspired by this, which is a profoundly beautiful homage of being a Gundam healer. Who would have thought of a Gundam healer? Not gonna lie, this actually 100% did actually make me a little bit emotional when I started to piece it together. So now let's move forward. Why did I say this? And I probably got ahead of myself there. Let's talk about this new Gundam Version Ka kit. This is referencing its Gundams channel, where we can see the model new Gundam Ka looks like this. And citing particular screenshots of this, we can see that it has 4 weapons, particularly named fin funnels, which unfortunately he does state that there was some damage to some of his model, and so he only has 4. The kit actually comes with a default of 5, so I don't want to be misleading and say, oh, it must be exactly 4. No, he did state in the video that there should be 5, and he just went 4 and 4 to be an even number. But wait, what are these things called, fin funnels? I'll actually let a modeler in college describe fin funnels as they relate to New Gundam.
The new Gundam mounts 6 unique remote weapons called the fin funnel, and a magnetic field is formed between the 2 generator arms to generate and accelerate mega particles. Despite their name, the fin funnels are technically bits and allows them to fire more powerful beams. The fin funnel can also generate a unique beam shield known as the fin funnel barrier to protect against beam weaponry and solid projectiles. The fin funnels have higher mobility thanks to a triple block design and thrusters.
So in here, there were 2 extremely important pieces of information that relate back to the Sage, that these fin funnels could deploy powerful shields, which make a lot of sense as the Sage has already been stated to be a barrier healer, and likewise we have seen that in the footage, as well as these fin funnels are actually a subclassification of what is called bits in the Gundam universe. Other points of information that are interesting include that the fin funnel was designed to have more mobility than most of the bit tile systems, with built-in thrusters to allow the extensive mobility that we could see in any footage of the Sage, and that the bits are controlled by magnetic waves, which in the world of Final Fantasy XIV could be an etheric manipulation. Another point that seems relevant is that the fin funnel's design allows them to also fire more powerful beams, as we can see from the footage of the actual Sage gameplay in game, that the entire field is bathed in beams of destruction, far more destructive power than you'd expect from any standard firearm, or from a gun this small, like a single Nouliths. And likewise, we can see other examples in the background of just different models. Some of these are from Mecha Gaikoksu, and some of them are from Zethinonics. So now this brings me to my next question of asking, what is a bit? Since a fin funnel is technically a type of bit, what sorts of characteristics do they have that might relate to Sage? Bits are a common theme in the Gundam that I am going to cite. Bits or fangs, or in the Sage's case the Nouliths, can be controlled through brainwaves, such as those that you might receive from an external EEG headset, for instance, something that I actually had talked about my love for earlier on in this channel. But the EEG headset receives these brainwaves and then turns them into actions through an external machine, which allows the pilot to mentally control the bits, or in our case fin funnels, through electromagnetic fields. But in here, we're going to be replacing quantum brainwaves in here, and then the machines that turn it into electromagnetic waves with Aether. And bam! You have a Sage controlling Nouliths with Aether. There is, however, mentioning here as well that there are special pilots that utilize the bit system better than others, and are better users of the bit system, because it does require a significant portion of attention and quick reaction times in order to properly do it. However, this article does also mention that there is a Hero artificial intelligence that could be used to assist the pilot in controlling the bits and fangs and compensate for the mental load on the pilot. Given the Sage's actions we've seen thus far, such as the cast times, we can only assume that the Hero AI doesn't exist in Final Fantasy XIV Sage, and instead having the cognitive load primarily placed upon the pilot of these bits and fangs, in this case the Sage themselves, leading to cast times. More examples of bits can include things such as the Cherudim's GN shield bits, Reborn Gundam's small GN fin fangs, and Zabandia's GN rifle bit 2s. Likewise, it is very easy to see from these images that they can come in many different shapes, sizes, and flavors, and that they can act likewise pretty differently from one another. But let's cycle back to barriers with fin funnels and what a fin funnel really can do. Because now we've identified the weapon and its means of connecting the weapon's lore to the Final Fantasy XIV lore and see how the Sage could control it, that this is now a very unique weapon, and I think that we can rummage in the Gundam world to learn more about what we're going to see for Sage in the 14 world. First off, what I am sure is obvious to everyone at this point is that funnels have been stated to have a small beam weapon equipped to it. Small? Okay, I mean, after that ability showcase, with especially that AoE, not so small at all, but to me this difference, this dichotomy between a small beam weapon versus what I saw, indicates to me that the developers have opened the playing field to the beam weapons showcased in the Gundam universe in that same Gundam era, so the fin funnel really has an expanded repertoire of abilities for the Sage. Or rather, I should try and call them Nouliths from now on. But before I move on to the different beam types that we can look into, I first want to talk about the fin funnel field. The fin funnel field was noted as capturing the firing of the fin funnels in an electromagnetic field that would shape them into a very thin slice of beam to prevent damage from coming into a target. Likewise, barrier healer. I'm not going to belabor the point, but definitely a ton of lore here for that. But now doing more digging, I want to see what other kinds of bits or other beam weapons there were in that era, because honestly, I think that this could give more insight into what variations the Sage might have. After all, we were told outright in the slide in text that the Sage is going to have actions that can modify their other actions taken. And for me, I like to speculate on what I've been given and what we already have uncovered now, and I'm sure that going into the depths of the Gundam lore on beam weaponry could really be quite illuminating for what we're going to see in the Sage. While unfortunately, in spite of much digging, I wasn't able to find much more about specifically fin funnel customization. While fin funnels might not have had more information, who is saying that Nouliths really need to stop at fin funnels? After all, it is a beam type weapon like I said before. So I came across an article speaking at length about the various weapon types seen during a time period called the Universal Century, and it really had a lot of information here that I found really genuinely interesting, and that there were a heck of a lot of different type of beam weapons, all weapons that are prime candidates to inspire the Sage's playstyle. So first off, I want to talk about the variable speed beam rifle. This essentially was different firing styles that the beam rifle could assume to either fire low-speed beams with high destructive power, or high-speed beams with, well, what this article is calling penetrating power. But in my mind, from a Final Fantasy XIV perspective, this screams at the top of its lungs that in Sage terms that the Sage can augment themselves to either have a rapid-firing beam rifles that have like lower cast times akin to the Malefic ability on Astrologian with a 1.5 second cast time, and remember that the global cooldown generally is 2.5 seconds cast time, so that 1.5 seconds leaves an 1 second opening, or that they can choose as the Sage to maybe have an even longer cast time, so the variable speed of the beam rifle, so that maybe they would have something like a 3 seconds or 4 seconds cast time for an even larger burst of damage, which I believe might be very well what we saw in the ability showcase. So 1.5 second cast time, again, I want to iterate, would mean that this would allow the Sage to weave in off global cooldown abilities between spamming their beam fire cast times and open up a very variable playstyle where if they need to weave in an off global cooldown, they could use the faster beam. Alternatively, if they want to just focus in on really pumping out the damage, they could like augment their weapon into a slower firing one, which does feed completely into what that slide said. Generative beam rifle device is another thing worth mentioning here, which in my mind, from the context of a Sage and as a scholar main for years, this lore from Gundam looks to me like a potential energy drain option. So it might be that the Sage could flick on the option for generative beam rifle and through their attack slowly generate MP. Of course, this would likely come with the condition that they would need to turn off other augments to their rifle fire, such as maybe lower their damage or something, basically for balancing purposes. Now, I want to take a look at the Mega Particle Cannon from this time period, and a Mega Particle Cannon weapon might be too large of an undertaking for a Sage, or at least a single Sage for sure, but the entire notion of having, and I quote, a focused beam of massive high-velocity mega particles which cannot be deflected by magnetic shields and tears through any conventional armor material sounds appealing. In fact, so appealing that in the world of Final Fantasy XIV, it really sounds like applying a debuff to an enemy to make it take enhanced damage, something akin to the Scholar's Chain Stratagem or to the Ninja's Trick Attack. So very much has a basis in 14. On that train of thought, the Sage being able to augment their abilities, I like the sections of this article speaking of the beam weapons ranging from beam rifles to beam spray guns to smart beam guns with multiple optional components. The beam rifle was also a weapon of the time, stated to work around the Mega Particle Cannon's energy demands, and hence likely a limitation of the etheric capacity of a single Sage, that the beam picked up popularity quite quickly in the Gundam world. This does seem massively plausible as the default beam attack that we see from the Nouliths. A beam spray gun has many limitations, primarily focused in on the story, but I think that from a 14 lens, that this might actually serve a purpose, stating that the beam was given a wider focus to cause widespread, or better known as area of effect, damage. And lastly, I want to talk about the Beam Smart Gun, which saw a large series of different augments for itself, which could be very interesting. In particular, however, I want to focus in on the cryo system. The cryo system, it really from the description reads to me almost as being an enhanced cooldown augment for the Sage that could help them recover quickly a powerful ability if it is used with the cryo system. Which, honestly, just as a whole, I have to say that these variations at least have me extremely super hyped for the Sage and wondering what the developers really did pull out of the lore for the Sage. And I'm left sitting here as I do in this video, just really genuinely wondering what sorts of augments or special unique interactions we might see. What kind of unique actions we see from the Sage that we've never seen before in this game. Clearly from the inspirational lore, we can see an absolute mountain of remarkable options and features that we could see. All that we can do, however, at this point is speculate on which ones are ultimately chosen until we finally see the May FanFest. So anyhow, that is all for this video, and I really do hope that you found it as cool and interesting to watch as I did researching and poking around for this information. And as always, if you want to help support me in my content, I would super incredibly appreciate if you slapped a stack of Nouliths on that like button and cat daddy that subscribe button. Now, I'm off to daydream about playing this absolutely bad AF healer.